Some high praise for Elly De La Cruz and some high praise for the Cincinnati Reds as an organization. What's up, everybody? I'm Craig Sandlin. Welcome in to Chatterbox Reds, joined by my good friend Nick Kirby. Nick, Monday evening, how are we feeling?
Feeling good as we record this. We are 2 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. Really snuck up on us, Craig.
Snuck up on you, maybe. I've been counting down the days for months, Nick. I've been ready. February 10th can't get here soon enough.
I think like the constant just news flow this offseason for me has really made it fly by. Like a lot of other off seasons, there was just such big lulls without any Reds news whatsoever, and there just really wasn't this offseason. I don't remember a single offseason like this. Maybe 2019 into 2020 when the Reds signed 4 players. That's kind of what it feels like. Maybe not the same energy around the fan base, but there's still been this kind of that same amount of just constant activity and news, and keeps it fun.
Yeah, maybe not the big blockbuster moves that some fans were hoping for, but I think when you talk about adding Terry Francona as your manager, that in itself counts for a blockbuster move. And certainly they've made some other moves along the way that, like most moves, are going to have some fans debating. But I think in general, we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. But this offseason has been an intriguing one for the Reds, and some of the national media is starting to talk about it. But before we get into that, Nick, let's remind our friends at home about our good friends at Deep South Commodities.
Yeah, as always, Chatterbox Reds, proudly sponsored by DSC. Deep South Commodities is a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks, as always, to John and his team at DSC.
All right, Nick, let's get into it. Earlier today on Monday, some exciting news out of Reds camp, as Elly De La Cruz announced via Instagram video that he is a cover athlete for MLB The Show 25.
Claro que mi gente, le habla Elly De La Cruz de los Rojos de Cincinnati y estoy muy emocionado de ser la nueva portada de MLB The Show 2025. Ya ustedes saben, hablamos ya. Le voy a ganar todito.
Shortly after Elly De La Cruz announces that he's a cover athlete for MLB The Show 25, Gunnar Henderson joins the parade and announces he also is on the cover.
What's up, everyone? I heard that Elly was going to be on the cover of MLB The Show 25, but I thought it was supposed to be me. So Elly, call me.
So some confusion there. Maybe the MLB The Show decided to put some of the best young shortstops on the cover this year. Many thought maybe Elly, Gunnar, and Bobby Witt, but no. Another surprise wrench thrown into it shortly after Gunnar Henderson.
What's up? This is Paul Skeens. Gunnar, Elly, I heard you guys are claiming the cover of the show, and I just want to let you know that the cover's mine. So let's settle this before the cover drops.
That's right. Livy Dunn's boyfriend thinks that he is an MLB The Show cover athlete. So Nick, 3 different guys all say that they're supposed to be part of the cover of MLB The Show. What do you think? Are we going to get a triple cover with 3 players on it? Or are we going to get regional covers? Or are we going to get some sort of vote where the fans get to decide on who gets the cover?
Ooh, that's a good question. I assumed it was just going to be like a 3-person cover, but I don't know. It would feel kind of weird if you were like to go through that and then you don't get picked, right? Like, yeah, I was the runner-up to the MLB The Show cover. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I would. I don't know if that'd be the way I would want to go about this. So my guess is it's some sort of like 3 showcases and 3 of the best young players in the game. But yeah, I mean some voting. I mean that would certainly be great if you're a marketing person for MLB The Show. I mean you have people voting on the cover athlete. I mean, that would be a great way to draw some buzz about your product. So I would like it from their perspective.
Well, look, dating back to 2017, the MLB The Show has not had more than 1 cover athlete in a year. In order from 2017 forward, Ken Griffey Jr., Aaron Judge, Bryce Harper, Javi Baez, Fernando Tatis Jr., Shohei Ohtani, Jazz Chisholm, and then last year Vladimir Guerrero Jr. all have graced the cover. And Nick, one of the intriguing things for Reds fans is that unlike Madden, the cover athletes for MLB The Show have actually had quite the opposite and had a ton of success on the season where they are MLB The Show cover athletes.
Yeah, there hasn't been a whole lot of jinxing. Not that I personally am someone who subscribes to that kind of nonsense. But no, there's been a lot of success. Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Bryce Harper, all on there, all had great seasons the year after. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of jinx or anything like that. The more fascinating thing, just assuming that Elly's not voted out of this I believe, and our good friend Ricky Logan, who's a great supporter here at Chatterbox Reds, pointed out that Elly De La Cruz would be the first legitimate cover athlete in Cincinnati sports history. Now, Chad Ochocinco was on NFL Street 3, but I mean, this would be the first legitimate Cincinnati sports cover athlete. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think of.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of good athletes coming through Cincinnati, obviously, but I don't think any of them have really captivated the league-wide audience quite the way that Elly has early in his career. Obviously, I'm a huge Ochocinco fan. I think let's see if I can use that right there. For those of you watching the video, is Chad Ochocinco bobblehead, and then a couple Chad Ochocinco autographed footballs and stuff. So not very many bigger Ochocinco fans than me. And Elly's certainly up there in terms of the personality and the intrigue that he draws, and certainly rivals Chad in terms of talent and potential. So it's exciting. And it's, ultimately becomes the question of the same thing that we've been debating for months now, Nick, and that is, obviously, being the face of the MLB, or certainly one of the young faces of the MLB, given his trajectory, Elly De La Cruz is in for a massive payday in 2029. And so the question becomes, what is Elly's future in Cincinnati? Unless they can sign him sooner than later, is it realistic to expect Elly to be playing in Cincinnati into the 2030s?
I don't really think so at this point. I mean, I think that if there was a betting odds, I'd probably put the Reds at I don't know, plus 175 maybe. I don't know, Craig. Do you think that's a fair number? I don't think it's like plus 1,000 or anything crazy. But I think it's becoming less and less likely. There's really two ways you could look at this. Number one, you can be the pessimist who looks at this and goes, man, the Reds have a great player and he's going to leave. You can look at it the other way and go, well, the Reds have a really, really great player that has come out of nowhere, had a lot of hype and promise. And how many times we see players that have incredible hype and promise and potential and they don't really amount to much? Well, Elly De La Cruz has played one full season in the big leagues and we think is going to be the cover athlete, one of the cover athletes in the biggest baseball video game on the planet. That's how quickly he's kind of rose. So, I mean, I don't know. I personally, I'm not going to sit here after every Chatterbox Reds episode all year and talk about his contract or what's going to happen. Just because it just takes the joy out of what you have here. And I know that's cliche to say. I know Tommy Thrall, when he was on Off the Bench, talked about how just enjoy it while you have it, but it's the truth, man. The Reds are never going to have another player like Elly Cruz. They'll have great players. They may have a player in the future that is actually maybe a better overall player that produces a higher wins above replacement or whatever. But you're never going to have a player that's like this electricity and just Elly. So you have to just try to enjoy it. And don't take it for granted, because I've said this many times before, but back in the Reds run of 2010 to 2013, I couldn't stand Dusty Baker. I despised Dusty Baker. I despised it because I was getting at all these analytics, and everything Dusty Baker did was just a slap in the face to analytics. And I allowed that to make myself frustrated about the Reds. And looking back, it's like, okay, it didn't really change all that much. Reds had some incredible seasons. They won 97 games in 2012. And honestly, I let myself get miserable during a lot of it. And I'm like, I regretted a lot of it. And so, me personally, I'll never let something like that happen again. I'm just going to enjoy Elly De La Cruz. Hope and pray the Reds can find a way to sign into a long-term contract. But if it doesn't happen, well, when we get closer, we'll talk about, what the Reds need to do and have those tough conversations. But for right now, I'm just gonna, sit back and enjoy a generational talent.
Yeah, look, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Nick. I think plus 175 is the most generous line you've ever given. I mean, with all due respect, if that line's not pushing plus 1,000, I mean, I think you're crazy. The odds of Elly De La Cruz being a Cincinnati Red in 2030, to me, is incomprehensible at this point. And as much as we'd love to make it happen, I think sitting here knowing the situation, knowing what he just did in his first full season, knowing who his agent is, knowing what the market is right now for these young players and what guys like Juan Soto just got and what this Reds ownership has been willing to do in the recent history for their superstars. It's just really hard to see a situation where they pony up the cash, where Scott Boras says, yeah, okay, Elly, this makes sense today for you to sign this long-term extension to be a Cincinnati Red for the rest of your career, or for the foreseeable future even, right? Maybe it's not for the rest of your career, but for beyond 2029. Honestly, if I had to set the over-under, I'd probably set it at opening day 2029. I think realistically, I think he gets dealt before we ever even get to his final season. He's under team control through 2029. So the worst, absolute worst case scenario, as we've talked about before, is that you move him at the trade deadline, assuming you haven't signed him to a deal at that point. Because if you get to the trade deadline and you're basically trading 3 months of Elly De La Cruz, the return that you can get versus having a full year of Elly De La Cruz, or even a year and a half if you move him at the previous deadline, so different in terms of return. Now, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to get a crazy return for him, but the return that you'd be able to get for him going into that offseason from a competing team who's expecting to compete for a World Series, or a team prior a year and a half of Elly De La Cruz, I just think it's so in the Reds' wheelhouse. And barring a change in ownership, just being honest, I don't see it happening as much as I would love to see it happen. And it's really frustrating to say that. You look at the Bengals and the historic unwillingness to pay guys, but they still went out and they paid Joe Burrow NFL quarterback #1 salary at the time. And they're likely this offseason to go out and do something similar with Jamar Chase and make him the highest paid wide receiver. And they'll likely pay T. Higgins some crazy amount of money as well. And yet here we are with the Cincinnati Reds and that ownership group, who have done very little to prepare themselves to have to pay someone like Elly De La Cruz. You start to see the writing on the wall with the Bengals by them going out and giving or selling naming rights to the stadium and adding a whole lot of new corporate partners to try and raise the funds to be able to pay Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You just don't see that from Cincinnati. You see a lot of complacency, if we're being quite honest, and a lot of the same. And so, unfortunately, as we sit here today, your plus 175 is a line that zero people would likely ever pay, because the odds of Elly De La Cruz being a Red in 2030 is just so low right now in my mind.
We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay. I really don't think I I don't know. Maybe I'm alone on this. I don't think it's the Reds necessarily that are the reason that Elly De La Cruz won't be necessarily. I fully believe that the Reds will offer Elly De La Cruz $300+ million. Just the economic player, the economic value of him goes far beyond baseball. I don't think that's the question. I just don't think that. I don't think Elly De La Cruz is going to accept $300 million right now. I think he's going to want to get a lot more than that. So, first off, I hope that the Reds are smart enough to make a real offer and leak it. Like, and so like people know just like the Nationals did with Juan Soto. And I think their fan base, most of them realized like, okay, like you had to trade him before he got to free agency. You can't just let him walk. So I don't know. The Reds paid Joey Votto $220 million 15 years ago. It's the same ownership group. I think they afford an Elly De La Cruz extension. I think it has very little to do with the Reds. And everything more to do just about, Scott Boras and wanting to get to free agency, wanting to compete. Now, if we talk about when do you move him? Yeah, I mean, if there's not a deal by the time the 2029 season starts, he's not on the Reds in 2029. There's close to a 0% chance of that. You have to deal him. I mean, you have to you kind of have to really have your decision on, or his decision, or an understanding of where you're at by the time you get to the 2028 the 2027 trade deadline. Because if you get to the 2027 trade deadline and you're out of it that season, just for example, let's hope the Reds aren't. If you're out of it that season's wasted. You're down to 2 years. So you might as well try to get that extra 2 months if there's any boost of that. So that's your first opportunity. You don't have to trade him after that off season, but again, you start every month that at least on the baseball field just decreases any value as you kind of go on. The only scenario where you let him walk at free agency is if you get to the 2028 season, Craig. The Reds everything has just blossomed around Elly De La Cruz, right? I mean, you have a team that has, and I know probably people listening think this is like crazy talk, but look, it's happened before. We have there's some teams across baseball that have just kind of flourished out of nowhere and become juggernauts. Let's say the Reds did become a juggernaut. Maybe you would say, hey, let's just, we'll ride it all the way out till the end. But I mean, you'd have to be a team that's one of the top 3 or World Series odds to keep Elly De La Cruz all the way to free agency, which is again very, very, very far fetched.
So let's play a quick game, Nick. I'm interested in your opinion here. I'm going to give you an MLB player and their contract, and I want you to tell me if you think that Elly De La Cruz will get more or less than that player. I'll actually tell you the player, not the contract amount, even though I have that in front of me as well.
Okay.
So just based on the player alone, you tell me, should Elly De La Cruz's contract be worth more or less than that player? Okay. And I'm going to we'll start with another shortstop, Corey Seager.
Well, it's going to be more than Corey Seager because he's entering free agency at a younger age, right? I mean, Corey Seager entered free agency at, actually they'll be close, won't they?
Corey Seager signed his contract prior to the 2022 season, which was his age 28 season. Elly De La Cruz, currently 3 years old, would make him 27-ish.
Yeah.
Going into his final season, 27 or 28, whatever that math is. So
yeah,
similar. So Corey Seager.
And Elly De La Cruz already has a season with a higher wins above replacement than Corey Seager's had in his career.
Okay. So higher or lower than Corey Seager's contract?
Higher.
Okay. So let's move on now to the contract that was signed in 2018 by a young Bryce Harper. Signed it going into his age 26 season. He's now in the 7th year. He's with 7 years with the Phillies now.
That's wild.
Isn't that
Yeah,
crazy?
I think he's higher than I think he's higher. I think he's close to Bryce Harper. They're
Okay.
It just depends really how great is Elly De La Cruz over the next 3 years.
Well,
I mean,
and that's ultimately going to be the question on this, right? And that's the risk, the reward that the Reds have to measure is ultimately where do they see Elly at that time frame and in the future? And that's the challenge, right? Is that you're eventually, ideally, making an investment in a future player, not necessarily the current player, because you have him through 2029. So if you're making a contract before that contract is over, or before you no longer have his rights, you're investing in his future and making the assumption that he's going to continue to progress, or that you have a good idea of where he is. So, okay, so you think more than Bryce Harper. So the next two are pretty close.
And real quick. I think if Elly De La Cruz puts up this exact same season last year, every year until his free agency contract, I'm talking not getting better, putting up that exact same numbers, I think he probably is at the same ballpark as Bryce Harper. Just as he plays shortstop, steals bases.
Okay. So the next two names on the list, their contracts are very similar, even though the scenario around those contracts were very different. So the total money is similar. The scenario leading up to the contract, very different. The first one, Fernando Tatis Jr. The second one, another shortstop, Francisco Lindor.
I think Tatis is like, I think when people were talking about Bobby Witt Jr. And saying, the Reds can get that. No, I think it's Fernando Tatis. I think that's the most comparable contract that I've seen to date. So yeah, I think Lindor is about the same or close to it. So yeah, I think he'll be about the same, very close. Probably
so
more just because baseball continues to keep giving out bigger contracts.
Because the important part to remember about that is Fernando Tatis signed his contract in 2021 and Francisco Lindor in 2022. So even though it sounds like it was recently, a lot has changed and a lot will continue to change over the next couple of years. And again, the uncertainties surrounding TV and so many other things will play a factor in the Reds' ability to make this contract offer. But again, this exercise is strictly, do you think that Elly as a contract or as a whole will make more or less than those players? And that right now is Tatis and Lindor. So you think around that number?
Yes. I don't think you've mentioned a player that I think is going to get that is going to earn more than Elly De La Cruz yet.
Okay. So the next player, so you're saying Elly will earn more than Fernando Tatis and Francisco Lindor?
Yeah, maybe similar, but I would probably say more.
Okay. So I think we're getting to a point where it's going to start to challenge you, right? So,
okay.
Maybe not this one, but the following one, I think will challenge you. So, the next one on the list is Manny Machado.
Yeah, I think he's probably more.
Manny Machado signed his contract going into the 2023 season. That was his age 30 season. So again, a little bit older, was an 11-year deal, takes him all the way through his age 40 season. So a little bit more than Manny Machado, you think?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Here's where I think it gets interesting. More or less than the contract signed for 2023 by then 31-year-old Aaron Judge.
See, I don't remember how much Aaron Judge was, but
good. I don't want you to remember. I just want you to think player versus player. Will Elly De La Cruz make more than you think Aaron Judge signed for?
I think he probably earns more, but Aaron Judge, I don't remember the contract, and he has that whole Yankee thing where I don't think a team across baseball was going to pay Aaron Judge what the Yankees paid him. So it's kind of a little bit of a deceiving. But I kind of think that someone you mentioned has already been higher than Aaron Judge. Or is Aaron Judge the highest to date?
Aaron Judge is the highest so far. Yep.
Okay.
I'm going in order from
that's
bottom
where
up.
this is where I think it's close, but Aaron Judge is that caveat of being, the Yankees.
Yep. And again, I'm doing it based on total contract value, not AAV.
Okay.
So total contract value. So the next one on the list, signed in 2021 by then 28-year-old Mookie Betts.
That one's gonna be, I mean, he's gonna be right around there, I think. The biggest thing here is Elly De La Cruz is entering younger than a lot of these guys, and that's gonna have a higher total because Manny Machado is 30 years old, so you're gonna have probably more years.
Which is
and
why
Elly
it's
De La
interesting
Cruz,
because
Elly De La Cruz also might not sign a full contract. He might try to have opt-outs and and
it may not be a 10 to 13 year deal like a lot of these guys that we're talking about right now, but it's interesting because the next one on the list is very, very similar to Elly De La Cruz's situation, signed a while ago, but going into the age 27 season in 2019, Mike Trout signed his contract. He's next on the list, number 3 overall in total contract value.
Yeah, again, I think it's close. I think Elly has the potential to earn more than every single player you mentioned. Just depends how he plays.
So, and this is why we did this exercise. Is not because we're trying to figure out how much Elly De La Cruz is going to make. Obviously, that's part of it, but we're showing you comparables and why it is, in my mind, so far-fetched to think that the Reds would be able to sign Elly De La Cruz to a long-term contract is because I find it hard to believe, and this is just my Reds fandom, I think, hard to believe that I could see the Cincinnati Reds signing a guy like Mike Trout or signing a guy like Shohei Ohtani or Juan Soto, who are the top 3 names on the list. So if we just went through number 10 through number 4, and you told me that all of them probably earn slightly less than what you expect Elly De La Cruz to earn, that Aaron Judge contract was $40 million a year, straight up $40 million a year, every year for 9 years. Some of these are longer, some of these are shorter. Mookie Betts, 12 years, $365 million. Mike Trout, 12 years, $426.5 million. You mentioned the $300 million number, and that was the number that I think going into the season that we threw around a lot for Elly De La Cruz, was that $300 million range, because guys like Bobby Witt signed their contract for $288 million. And so now that we've had another full season, or we've had a full season of Elly De La Cruz, that number, at least in my mind, is starting to creep closer to 4, if not over $400 million in order to lock up Elly De La Cruz for a long-term contract. Like you said, though, Elly De La Cruz may not need a 12-year contract. You may be able to sign him today to a 8-year contract, and that gets an extra 3 to 4 years of post-ARB Elly De La Cruz, and that may be worth it, and then allow him to explore free agency when he's going to be 30 years old or so. But the point of the matter stands is that Elly De La Cruz, for those of you who are listening and wondering, is going to likely garner somewhere in the $30+ million a year range in the open market. And so you have to ask yourself, yes, the Reds gave Joey Votto the $20+ million contract. Are they in a position today where you feel like they would offer $30+ million?
Yeah, I think they could. I mean, Nick Martinez, $21 million this year.
Right.
Like, you have to think about that. And again, there's a big difference between Aaron Judge and Fernando Tatis Jr. Like, the contract is is a $20 million difference. I just pulled it up. I waited till you were done. I waited. I was an honest man here. But Tatis is $340 million. Aaron Judge is $360 million. But Judge is 9 years. Tatis is 14 years. So spreading out $340 million over 14 years is quite a big difference. So again, I think the Reds can afford $30 million a year for 14 years. I don't think that hamstrings this team. Again,
but do you think
players,
they've
had players that have made close to that amount of money. I mean, Joey Votto made $25 million just a couple years ago. And again, I think it's more about that. But there's a lot of layers to this, because there's also a CBA that's going to come up before Elly De La Cruz is signed, and God only knows what that's going to do to baseball. I have no idea what it's going to do to baseball. I think anyone who tries to speculate is out of their mind, because I think you can see it going like 50 different ways. Who's gonna put up a fight? Who's not gonna put up a fight? So you can have a very different landscape by the time Elly De La Cruz's contract comes up, which is overall my biggest point is I wouldn't really worry about that. I know we just spent 15 minutes worried about it. But I really wouldn't worry about it too much. Like, seriously, just enjoy it. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to happen between now and then. And I hope to God that whatever happens, I hope that the Reds are smart enough, especially like, let's say they believe Elly De La Cruz is going to get $500 million. Why not leak that you offered him $400 million? Like, get that out there, baby. Like, come on. Like, at least, throw the fan base a bone or give them some sort of like hope that, hey, we did make a legitimate offer, which I think will happen at some point. I don't know. The only thing that really would make me mad is if the Reds never considered this before he debuted, because I knew it back then and I said it back then. This is in hindsight. I knew it. I hope to God they were willing to. Like, I would be more mad if the Reds wouldn't have offered Elly De La Cruz $150 million when he was still in AAA than if they don't offer him $500 million or $400 million down the line, because that's when you should have been willing to take the most risk. And maybe they did. We'll never know.
We will never know. And that's okay. And ultimately, like you said, I think the Reds have a responsibility to go at this full bore and do what they can to try and keep Elly De La Cruz in Cincinnati for as long as they possibly can. But look, we thought that this would be like an 8 to 10 minute segment, and we just went for 30. So I'm gonna cut it off. But the moral of the story, Nick, is what you said earlier, is that the Cincinnati fan base has the luxury of having a player who likely is worth $400+ million under team control for the next 5 years at a minimum. And we as the Cincinnati fan base should do everything we can to keep Elly in Cincinnati by supporting the team, by doing whatever we can to support Elly, and enjoy the ride. And whatever happens in 2028, 2029, so be it. But what we shouldn't be doing is spending the next 3.5 years, 5 years bashing Elly De La Cruz and trying to downplay the significance of what we have at our disposal right now with Elly De La Cruz, a man who, as we started the segment, is being recognized as one of the faces of the MLB by being put on the cover of MLB The Show.
Yeah, and my last point on this is also, like, I know a lot of people are not going to see it at all, and I understand why you're not, but it's not like you're going to be left empty-handed here. The Washington Nationals, you remember that James Wood guy that debuted against the Reds and absolutely torched them, looks like an absolute superstar? They got him plus Robert Hassel III, who hasn't debuted yet, great prospect, Mackenzie Gore, and C.J. Abrams. So, like, when you get a great player like this, yes, ideally we want to extend Elly De La Cruz, and that's the first and foremost, because you're almost going to be impossible to replicate that value. But you also are going to have a player that, by all likelihood, is going to bring you an absolute massive return to help you continue to be competitive and compete. And hopefully the Reds are. I don't want the Reds to be a World Series contender one year. I want this team to be a playoff contender year after year after year. I want like 7. Can we just have like 7 out of 10 years the Reds make the playoffs? Like, let's just see what happens. Maybe we'll get to the end of the 10 years and everyone will be like, well, they never did enough to try to win a World Series, or that model doesn't work. I would much rather debate that than debate and then have the talking point be the Reds made the playoffs 4 times in the last 25 years. So again, whatever happens with Elly De La Cruz, it's going to help the Reds be set up for a long time.